What's going on, folks? This is Undead FOIA, and this is FOIA Round and Find Out, a little show that we've put together, and we are Russiagate Sleuths. So, for the last several years, we've worked as amateur investigators looking at Russiagate from many different angles, but mostly pulling up FOIA documents or reading through declassified documents to try to get a little bit more information that isn't necessarily being covered on the day-to-day in the mainstream media. I'm joined by MB, who is going to be my co-host, fantastic researcher himself. And today we're just going to talk about the DNC hack a little bit because we have some information that is going to be a big story someday. And it's not being covered right now, but we have the documents. We have enough to put this out into the public and get it to you. And so that maybe you're interested in the DNC hack. Maybe you are kind of on the same page that we were, and that some of the story didn't really make sense. Maybe you didn't really appreciate that this was blasted 24/7 for years and years, and now all of a sudden there's really lack of interest in everything that happened, and you're just looking for more information, and that's what we do. So we spend a lot of FOIAs. We go to court and fight for documents, and when we need to, and most of all, we've been active on Twitter as a group. Loosely affiliated group for a number of years, and so we've kind of developed a little show. We did some of these spaces chats on Twitter for a while, and this is the next evolution of that. So happy to be with you all tonight, and thanks for coming, MB. It's always nice to see you.
It's great to see you, Undead. We kind of have a Sleuths After Dark thing happening here. It's
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we were streaming at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, I guess. So been a long day, been a long week, and happy to have you here, man.
Good to be here too. Yeah, it's been a long day. A lot of stuff's been breaking loose. There's some more Twitter files today. Matt was on with Hans on a Spaces chat, which was really cool, and it seems like a lot of stuff of the evolution of everything that we're talking about kind of is starting to come to light in a new way, and it's kind of exciting.
Absolutely, and we're definitely going to have a couple videos on some of the Russian Twitter bots and some of the theories that we have and some of the research that we have on that. I think that'd be a great topic. But great chat today with Hans, and Matt Taibbi joined us, and that was great to hear from him again. And I mean, without further ado, we can talk about the DNC hack a little bit. We're not necessarily going to hit it from the angle of everything that was wrong with the hack. There's a lot of issues that have been highlighted repeatedly throughout the years. These Russians, highly sophisticated operators apparently, use Russian language settings on the data or the documents that they released, used an IP address that had been blown. It was publicly identified as something that was tied to Russian intelligence. So it's really odd that they would use it. There's a litany of issues that are pretty amazing that a really sophisticated intelligence operation would commit those types of errors. But we're not going to necessarily recover that. So there's a lot of content out there about that. We're actually going to hit it a little bit more on the attribution side. And there's a lot of speculation out there. I think probably big pet peeve of mine is every time I post about the DNC hack, inevitably I get a couple people in my mentions talking about Seth Rich. And they don't want to hear anything else other than Seth Rich. And while I don't totally discount everything that relates to Seth Rich, I think the FBI in particular has done some really odd things, especially as relates to FOIA litigation and Ty Clevenger and the legwork that he's been putting in and just trying to get the documents. There's definitely some weird stuff that happened, but I am not an advocate of any theory that he was involved in the hack. And maybe MB disagrees with me, and maybe we have a chat on Seth Rich specifically in the future. But tonight, as I said, we're going to talk more about the attribution side because there are a few things that are a little bit weird. And I obtained this information primarily by submitting open records requests to Georgia Tech. And that's really where the information initially developed. So Georgia Tech, you might be thinking, what do you mean submitted information request to Georgia Tech? And the reason that I was doing that actually relates to the Alpha Bank allegations. And those were a set of allegations that Donald Trump had set up this secret communications channel to Vladimir Putin using Alpha Bank as an intermediary. And that was a very odd allegation. It really relates to a set of DNS lookups, which by themselves don't necessarily mean all that much. But attached to these DNS lookups was this narrative that was really unsupported by anything else other than, this white paper that said, yeah, we think this is a secret communications system, which doesn't make sense. I mean, if you really think about it logically, you've got a billionaire and you've got a leader of a foreign country. If they really wanted to talk, they would probably have a more sophisticated system, or, they would send somebody. It's not that much for a billionaire to send somebody on a plane and go talk to somebody that they need to talk to. So it didn't make much logical sense. The people that actually looked at the data, universally bad. I mean, everybody that's been truly independent of the initial researchers, I don't know of a single one that's actually found that to be credible. The conclusions range from the CIA calling it not technically plausible. There's one internet blogger that called it fraud. There's another internet blogger that called it probably malicious. And then there's some independent IT firms that have looked at it, and they also shot it down. And then when you talk, when you hear the FBI agents at the Sussman trial testify about it, they debunked it within a day. I mean, they gave it no credibility whatsoever. It didn't make sense. The Trump organization didn't even control the server. I mean, nothing about it added up at all. And when you got the Sussman indictment, and this was September 2021, there's some of these emails that are referenced because John Durham does a speaking indictment, and he references certain individuals beyond Michael Sussman, who was the one that was actually indicted. He references Tech Executive 1, later identified as Rodney Joffe. He identifies Originator 1, which was later found out to be April Lorenzen. And then he identifies two others, and Researcher 1 and Researcher 2. Researcher 1 is now known to be Manos Antonakakis of Georgia Tech, and Researcher 2 is David Dagan of Georgia Tech. And that's where what we're talking about tonight kind of ties back in. So these two researchers at Georgia Tech have a very interesting story because David Dagan is allegedly the one that authored that white paper for the Alpha Bank allegations. And as testified to at the Sussman trial, the FBI wanted to talk to him because they wanted to know how he came up with those allegations, where he pulled the data from, how it was constructed. And the 7th floor of the FBI rebuffed that. They didn't want to let anybody go interview this guy. So then it becomes really, really interesting. And I'm going to share a document on our screen. I meant to do that a little bit earlier. Bear with me 1 second. One second. Yes, here we go. Oh.
Yeah, and there was internal dissension in some of the emails that Durham produced and were in the FOIAs, that even the researchers themselves had big doubts about how robust this attribution was, just based on the work they were doing themselves. So that to me is a big red flag. That and you could see that there was pushback of, well, what's it going to take to get us to a place where we can convince other entities, and it's not like, well, this is so compelling we have to do this. So that to me is not a great look.
Yeah, and I appreciate you stepping in there as I pause. It's a new software system. We're just starting out here, and I was trying to share another document actually, but we can take a look at this one for now. And what these Georgia Tech researchers were subject to was a program at DARPA, and DARPA is a program or a sub-agency of the Department of Defense, and they have pretty broad goals. I mean, they're really trying to identify malicious cyber actors. Right. And they do that by indicators of compromise. They, they plug in a whole massive amount of data, and then based on patterns of behavior and some of the identifiers that are out there available online, they can positively identify certain malicious cyber actors that are out there. And that's sort of the goal. So maybe there's a foreign hacking group out there. They can identify that bad actor. And where that program comes back in is actually going to be, it appears, on the DNC hack. And that's at least our understanding right now of what subject or what prompted them to start doing some of these searches. Because after they did the Alpha Bank allegations, David Dagan describes that the Department of Justice actually contacted him and they began tasking him to start looking at a few different things. And I'm going to try to share another file if I can.
And that all came through DARPA, right?
That's right. Yeah, it was all sent
Department of
through
Defense.
DARPA. Yes. Okay. So I'll actually start with my FOIA documents here, and maybe I'll close this window and see if it works a little bit better. So submitting an open records request for emails for these researchers, I was really looking at the Alpha Bank matters. I really thought, okay, I'll go in these emails and I'll find, various things that, describe what they did in an Alpha Bank situation. And when we got in there, and I was collaborating with Margot Cleveland of the Federalist, who had some great reporting in the spring that everybody should check out. As I got in there, we started finding some of these pretty interesting emails. And right here, this is a representative of the state of Georgia who was in discussions to represent these individuals. She describes, in talking to David Dagan's lawyer, you indicate there's a fairly large file of Trump-related materials that have been assembled for production to the Office of Special Counsel Mueller or the Department of Justice. And that's really the headline of that email. And that was kind of a red flag, right? Like, what do you mean you work with the Department of Justice and Special Counsel Mueller? Because Mueller, as you remember, he was appointed in May 2017. So before that, as far as we knew, David Dagan's involvement had ended in October 2016 with Alpha Bank allegations, because that's when they wanted to interview him. So that told us, there was something more that we didn't know about. And as I scroll through this, we get to another email from David Dagan's lawyer. And this is in discussions to a grand jury subpoena that was issued to Georgia Tech. And they had kind of reached out to David Dagan's attorneys, and they're trying to find some of these documents that are responsive. And David Dagan's attorney goes on to describe what might be responsive. So they say DARPA white papers, and then they say white paper on DNC attack attribution. Well, that's pretty alarming right there. And then it says analysis of EOP networks. And if you've been following this really, really closely, there was an allegation that was circulated about a year ago now that Rodney Joffe and some of these researchers had looked at data from the White House itself. And we're still waiting to get a little bit more information on that. But then the next bullet point is white paper for DOJ on APT-29 related hackers. Now, that is Cozy Bear. So you might remember the DNC was hacked by two actors. Cozy Bear, who was there for a long time, for about a year, and then Fancy Bear. And Fancy Bear is the ones that everybody really thinks of. That was a much more acute hack that happened in April 2016. So they're talking about the other one. They're talking about the longer hackers, the Cozy Bear hackers. And then they were looking at crypto coin transactions and analysis that includes YOTA-related domains. So the crypto transactions might be relevant because we know that some of the domains and some of the infrastructure, the hacking tools that were purchased purchased using cryptocurrency. So that is a possibility that also ties into the DNC hack. And then finally, in quotations, Mueller list of domains and indicators related to APT-28. And now this one is Fancy Bear. So within these bullet points, we have them looking at Fancy Bear and Cozy Bear and creating a white paper on DNC hack attribution. So that was a big red flag, right? Like, okay, they're saying they worked on the DNC hack. And I want to highlight one other email before I go into Jerry Dunleavy's reporting. And this one is from Manos Antonikakis. And in the body of a longer email, he's talking to leadership at Georgia Tech. And he says, during one of my interviews with the special counsel prosecutor, I was asked point blank by Mr. DeFilippis, do you believe that DARPA should be instructing you to investigate the origins of a hacker, in quotations, Guccifer 2.0, that hacked a political entity, the DNC? Let that sink in a moment, folks. Someone hacked a political party, the DNC in this case, in the middle of an election year, 2016, and the lead investigator of the DOJ special counsel would question whether U.S. researchers working for DARPA should conduct investigations in this matter is acceptable. While I was tempted to say it back to him, what if this hacker had hacked the GOP? Would you want me to investigate him then? Blah, blah. He goes on from there. He's kind of rambling. Okay, he's saying that he looked at Guccifer 2.0. He investigated the hack of the DNC. And obviously that's telling us they looked at the hack of the DNC. And we've had this email for almost a year now, and we've been pretty careful with this. I think Margot Cleveland wrote a story connecting them to Assisting Special Counsel Mueller, and we're going to cover that a little bit later. But we've been pretty careful with this. I mean, if you just take this at face value, this is saying they might be responsible for the attribution for the DNC hack. I mean, they wrote a white paper on it, right? So I want to get into Jerry Dunleavy's article because that is important context, I think, for all future stories. Because what Jerry Dunleavy did was he took the reporting that, he took the reporting that we had come up with and that Margot Cleveland was putting out there, and he started asking questions to DARPA. And what DARPA did was they denied it. They denied everything, that they approved it or they had any role in it. And that's really important context to have. So let me find the sections here. Yeah. So
he's doing amazing work.
Yeah. Washington Examiner article, and they say, quoting a DARPA official, DARPA was not involved in efforts to attribute the DNC hack. Dr. Antonikakis worked on DARPA's enhanced attribution program, which did not involve analysis of the DNC hack. That's quoting Jared Adams, DARPA's chief of communications. Further, DARPA was not involved in efforts to attribute the Guccifer 2.0 persona, nor any involvement in efforts to attribute the origin of leaked emails provided to WikiLeaks. So that's pretty interesting, right? I mean, that's a pretty strong denial. And that prompted a lot of confusion. And I think Senator Grassley and Senator Johnson reached out and they wanted more clarification because, obviously you have researchers out there saying, we did this at the direction of DARPA, and DARPA saying, no, they didn't. And I want to pull up one other email. I think I know how to get to it now. And here we go. So now that we're on the screen, there we go. Okay. So this is the big important one. This is one that I've gotten a little bit more recently, and this sort of puts the issue to bed a little bit. So this is a letter from David Dagan's attorneys, and what they're doing is they're negotiating his legal fees, and they're arguing that he did all of this work as an employee of Georgia Tech for the benefit of the state of Georgia, and he's owed, I think they want $500,000 in legal fees to be paid for. We'll cover that in another topic. I think that's pretty alarming, but we'll do that on another chat. So what I do want to cover is this paragraph, these paragraphs right here. And this is under a header, work performed by Mr. Dagan for Georgia Tech that is subject to the investigation. And this is the investigation by Special Counsel Durham. So remember, this is the author of the Alpha Bank white paper. And before we'd gotten into some of these documents, that's the extent of his relationship to Russiagate, as far as we knew. So paragraph 1, the work that Mr. Dagan did on attribution analysis of communications traffic, which relates to the current legal matter, involved research on the Democratic National Convention hack, and I think they meet committee, the Advanced Persistent Threat 28, APT 28, which is Fancy Bear malware, analysis of potential attack traffic related to the 2016 election, including traffic between the Trump Organization, Spectrum Health, and Alpha Bank, that's the Alpha Bank allegations, and analysis of Yotaphone communications traffic. And that's another subject we'll cover in another video, but they're basically alleging that Donald Trump himself had carried around a Yotaphone. This work is in no less scope than no less within the scope of Mr. Dagan's employment than the work he did on the Mariposa botnet. Okay. I'm going to skip the next paragraph. It's not too relevant, I don't think. But here's something that's very, very interesting. And like I said earlier, I mean, someday this is going to be the subject of a lot of discussions on broadcast networks, I believe. And I think Durham's report is going to cover this pretty extensively. So here's another important paragraph. As we noted in our previous call, when Mr. Dagan undertook a thorough review of work related to the investigation, which was performed from the end of 2016 forward, he discovered that almost all the initial work performed by him was on behalf of Georgia Tech under the DARPA contract. The work related to queries submitted by the U.S. Department of Justice through DARPA regarding Russian communications between Alpha Bank and the Trump Organization. So I'm going to pause right there. He's saying that the Department of Justice tasked him specifically to look at the Alpha Bank allegations. And that's really, really interesting because he was the one, he along with Rodney Joffe and a couple others, they're the ones that authored the white paper. They sent it to the FBI anonymously with Michael Sussman. Michael Sussman, as you remember, he brought those allegations to the FBI in September of 2016. And now he's saying in this email that at the end of 2016, he was tasked to look at those allegations by the Department of Justice. So that's a pretty big red flag. I mean, that doesn't really make sense. And it's pretty alarming if this meaning is true to sort of the plain language here, that the Department of Justice actually tasked him to look at it, because it's sort of a circular reporting that is alarming. So continuing this paragraph here, and the Trump Organization and Mr. Trump's use of a Russian Yodaphone. So that's what we just referenced a moment ago. They're saying that Mr. Trump himself used a Russian Yodaphone. And the exact nature of those allegations is a little bit unclear. The exact subject matter of the criminal grand jury subpoena that Mr. Dagan received from the Durham investigation. The requests were sufficient to require Mr. Dagan and Professor Antonikakis to set up a file within the DARPA project called DOJ and a subfile called Mueller, because they knew that these requests were coming from the DOJ and being sent back via DARPA to the Department of Justice and the Mueller investigation. So that's a lot there. I mean, there's a lot in that paragraph. He's saying that the Department of Justice tasked him to look at the DNC hack. The Department of Justice tasked him to look at the Alpha Bank allegations. But when he's talking about Mueller, okay, that is much later. That's into 2017. So not only does it appear that these two individuals had a role in the DNC hack attribution, but despite the FBI wanting to interview some of these individuals, somehow they found their way back into this investigation, submitting work product via DARPA. And I think that is a subject that can be investigated quite extensively. I think that strikes me as a little bit unusual. If the Department of Justice, if the FBI or Special Counsel Mueller needs resources, I don't understand the need for intermediaries, and that's alarming. I mean, do they want to hide the source of the information that they're getting, or is this just bureaucracy, right? I mean, and that's possible, and I leave open that as a possibility, but that is pretty striking to me. So that's really what I wanted to throw out there, that these same individuals that are associated with these Alpha Bank allegations, with data that is alleged by many out there, including the CIA, to be manipulated, to be incomplete, to be not technically plausible. These same individuals appear to have a prominent role in assisting Special Counsel Mueller, in assisting the Department of Justice, and they looked at the hack of the DNC. And this next point, I don't have any documentation on it. We do have we had an individual who came to us maybe 15 months ago, came to another researcher that I work with, and he said that Rodney Joffe, who was another individual involved in these Alpha Bank allegations, that Rodney Joffe also had a role in the attribution for the DNC hack. So that, if that's true, I mean, you have some of these same individuals coming back around, and that just deserves a lot of questions. I think that's very alarming. And, that's really what we wanted to put out there tonight. So, MB, I don't know if you want to jump in with some of your thoughts or what you might be thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing to circle back to uh, what Jerry Dunleavy had reported was that DARPA had denied making any of these requests of Georgia Tech via DOJ, that they basically said they had nothing to do with it initially. And I don't know if they've ever corrected that on the record, but there's substantial documentation that that is not true, that uh, the DOJ was making requests through DARPA because it was their program, they were paying for it, to Georgia Tech. So that's taxpayer money, federal money coming through the Department of Defense, and we've talked about this. Whether, okay, is that domestic surveillance exactly? It's a gray area because the political campaign, you're looking at the the presidential campaign, for God's sake, of Donald Trump, and yeah, obviously there's a Russian component to it, but that's supposed to be what the FBI looks at, and uh, when they're using Defense Department military resources to do that, that to me is a really disturbing thing to happen, and really nobody knew about it. This is all at the level of researchers at Georgia Tech, whoever at the Mueller investigation and the DOJ was making it. It seemed like DARPA was just sort of passing it through, just rubber stamping it. So it seems like a major I don't know, that it just seems like a big deal to me that the military was spying on not spy, well, however you want to look at it, was participating in this activity against a presidential campaign. Their resources were being used, and no one was there. There was no oversight. There was nobody stepping in saying, "Wow, should we be doing this or not?" So that was a big deal to me. That it always has been, and I hope that that's something that gets looked at.
Yeah, I was just pulling up another document there, and I think I'm going to cover it probably in another Spaces chat. But there is a broader context here, and you make some really good points there. I mean, I don't think a lot of Americans would understand that when the FBI wants data, apparently the FBI doesn't have that capacity within their internal resources. They farm that out, and we did get some indication of that, I think, during the Sussman trial when they wanted to recreate the data supporting the Alpha Bank allegations. They actually went to third party entities. They went to I think the host, actually, which probably makes sense, but I think they went to a couple different third parties, including GoDaddy, to try to reconstruct the data. And it's like, okay, they don't necessarily have the technical resources within their own systems. And the document I was just pulling up there for a second, that actually indicates there's a broader data collection program that Rodney Joffe is actually involved in, which is pretty alarming. That includes domestic data collection and provision of that data to the Department of Defense. And it appears that there's an effort underway to federalize the use of that data across multiple agencies. And there's some emails out there that I'd like to do in our video on, where Kirk McConnell, who's working at the Senate, is discussing some of this program, which I think they call it the Big Data Platform, in which it integrates different data, both domestically and foreign, to kind of look at some of the stuff. And to the point that you just made, I mean, it's a great point. DARPA denies that they had any role in this, and yet, in multiple letters and multiple emails, these individuals that are, at legal risk right now with a lot on the line, David Dagan, he's got immunity. He's got an immunity deal with John Durham. Like, there's no reason that he would lie when trying to negotiate his legal fees, because he would just be throwing away his immunity agreement. And I don't know if those legal fees would be worth all that, because he's saying, he can't have these misrepresentations in there and hope to get his legal fees paid for. So we have every reason to kind of believe him. And I find it very, very alarming that DARPA is saying, no, we didn't approve this. We don't apparently know anything about it. And yet these guys are saying repeatedly over and over that they were doing this and submitting the information via DARPA. So it, seems fair to speculate that some of these individuals at DARPA that were apparently the conduits of this information might not have been looping in their superiors. I don't know if that's fair speculation. It seems to be the case. But if that's the case, it just opens up this can of worms where you don't know, there's an inference to draw that is malicious, and I don't want to go there yet until we get more documentation. But it doesn't make sense, right? So I think that's a great point, MB. Did you have anything else? I think I have one more point, and then I don't necessarily have anything else.
Sure. I think this is just an example of something we're going to see again and again, and probably will take a number of other chats and to talk about, because it actually is happening everywhere. It's this public-private collaborations that it's been going on for years, but they're disturbing because you have obviously these government agencies working with companies and paying them, or having some other considerations, and it's a way to get around a lot of the normal workings, say the FBI or the DOJ or the NSA, that they farmed out these things. And so we saw this with the FOIA issues. I'm sorry, with the FISA issues, where you have contractors that are able to access things that government agents aren't. And it was, that was caught finally. At some point, it was caught, but it's these loopholes that, oh well, we're not allowed to do this, but our partner that is not working for the government maybe is allowed to do certain things. And that kind of the same thing that's happening here. Not that Georgia Tech was necessarily doing anything illegal or that you would maybe need a warrant for, but I think it's just not litigated right now. We don't know. DNS data is a real gray area, and most people agree that the law has just not caught up with the technology. It can tell you a lot of things. It can't tell you everything, but if you take an aggregate of all this data, you can learn a lot, which is the reason that these programs exist. If it wasn't useful, no one would do it. So when they say, "Oh, well, you can't learn that much. It's just DNS data." Well, if you couldn't learn that much, there wouldn't be millions and millions of dollars worth of contracts out there that that are on the line that make this stuff really important. So I do think that, and even as late as today, we're learning more about some of these quasi political groups that are hooked into companies, and it just I think we're gonna definitely have to have some conversations about whether farming this stuff out to private companies and thereby escaping a lot of oversight, maybe getting through some loopholes in the law, if that is going to require a lot more oversight and maybe just eliminate some of these possibilities altogether.
That's another great point. And I think when you talk to some of these CEOs, and I think it'd be really interesting to get some of them before Congress to hear what they testify to. If you listen to them speak, it sounds like most often they say sort of what you just said, that the data that they provide is just anonymous. It's just metadata. It's not that big a deal. But then you're giving it to a government agency that has the ability and the intention of stripping away that anonymity, and they're building in, social profiles, and they're using it to identify certain actors, and they're using it to measure you and track you. And there's so many instances where people expect privacy online, and there's obvious examples and some not so obvious examples. But I think Senator Wyden, he sent out a letter in mid-December. He hit it right on the nose. I mean, people have a right to expect a degree of privacy online. And when you look at some of these vendors that were selling data to Georgia Tech, which includes Newstar, which is a company that Rodney Joffe was a prominent executive at, were these customers aware that their data was going to be used in this manner? I would suspect no, they probably weren't aware. And then you have to start asking about what type of contracts in terms of use were in place, and how many other companies are providing data. Because I'm quite confident Newstar is not the end of it. There's probably other prominent companies, and I know there are, that are under contract with DARPA, and the extent of what they're providing to the Department of Defense is unclear. So it's very, very alarming. I think you're absolutely right to call that out. I think we need a comprehensive data privacy law. You and I have talked about that extensively. I think we're absolutely on the same page. And when they're pulling this data, they should need a warrant. I mean, they're going through people's internet history. They're making all these, intrusive inquiries. And I would argue, I mean, some of the stuff that they're looking at online is more personal than if a police officer stops somebody on the street and frisked them. I mean, I would rather be frisked. Throw me up against the wall, run through my pockets. I would prefer that than, going through all my text messages the last 5 years, or, tracking my location history, or whatever the instance might be. I think it's much more intrusive. And there are some cases that kind of look at that. But to your point, I mean, it really hasn't been flushed out. It is a gray area. But I really resent the degree of arrogance that we see out there, where we see some of these researchers saying, "Oh no, it's fine, it's DNS, settled law," or whatever they're arguing, and that's really not the case. I don't think any American out there would be happy to learn the degree of intrusiveness that some of these programs, and you know what? There's a lot of other programs that are certainly doing some similar things. So, yeah, that's probably another discussion for another day.
Something I do think we might want to touch on is, and neither of us are experts on this, and I'm sure we'd be happy for some feedback, but how effective this particular avenue is, I think, is very much open to debate. DNS is very susceptible to spoofing, to all the things that when Sussman brought this to the FBI and to the CIA, they had the same initial reaction. And I'll even push back a little bit and say, all right, I don't know that that either the FBI or CIA conclusively said this is the white paper and the data that they were given is fraudulent or impossible. I think they left that door open, certainly, but I think their reaction was, this is just not something that we can confirm or deny. It's just too easy for this to either be it could be spoofed, it could be cherry picked. There's a million different possibilities where this came from, why this landed on our desk and not something else. And that to me is kind of a big deal in this whole thing, because there's a lot of money on the line. These are big government contracts. We can see that obviously people are turning to Georgia Tech to investigate all kinds of things, apparently. And they need this. There's a lot of careers on the line. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of futures. I mean, some of these techs had businesses of their own that they were branching off into, and not to say they did anything wrong, or but they certainly wanted this to succeed. And this again goes back to, where's the oversight? Where's the people that making sure that, hey, playing devil's advocate, saying, wait a minute, this doesn't say what you said, what you think it says. The pushback, we didn't see very much of that, and that to me has a lot of red flags that this technology was used not only for the Alpha Bank, the Mueller investigation, and potentially the DNC hack. If this is not a particularly robust technology or investigative tool that you can really rely on, that's a huge problem, that so much was invested in it.
Absolutely. I think taking a step back a little bit, and there's one other point that I wanted to raise, and that's a little bit more on the hack itself. So there's a lot of context that we haven't really covered tonight. Certainly we'll probably do some more videos and try to cover some of that context that you might not necessarily have. But the narrative has been falling apart. It's been falling apart for a number of years now. There's supposed to be the Steele dossier, which has been totally ripped to shreds. I mean, it's just totally garbage now. There's supposed to be this Alpha Bank communication server that's been ripped to shreds. And really the only thing left to my mind is the DNC hack itself. So, to see some of these same researchers turning up on the DNC hack is very alarming. And even circling back to what Matt Taibbi's been reporting and what we've kind of been speculating for a number of months as well, the Russian Twitter bot story, the whole, at least some of the Internet Research Agency, it's going straight to the interference and disinformation campaign, all those narratives and this concerted effort that was supposedly in place by Russia. None of that seems to have actually happened. And when you start realizing that a lot of this was fabricated, it breaks down to a very simple question. And that is, if the DNC hack was real, if it was legitimate and Russia actually did it, why would Clinton operatives go and fabricate additional evidence to make it worse? Right? Why would they, play up this Russian Twitter thing? There's another piece of this where apparently Clinton operatives or operatives with ties to the Clinton campaign actually created fake Russian Twitter bots to bolster a narrative and tie Republican candidates to them for the purposes of smearing him. The Alpha Bank allegations, they look like fraud. I mean, that is my conclusion based on, really using other experts' opinions, I guess. But, they're ripped to shreds. I don't see any validity to them. It appears that Clinton operatives spoofed that or set that up in some manner, in some fashion that we don't have a full understanding of yet. And then, if all this, this dossier, right, where it appears, Steele just has to put whatever on a piece of paper. He didn't really care where it came from. And all this comes together. And it's like, if all this was fraud and there was no Russian interference campaign, why would they hack the DNC? Like, if that was just going to be it, and there was no larger collusion conspiracy, there was no broader interference campaign. And look, there might be, a few pieces of Internet Research Agency. I think there probably are a couple Russian Twitter accounts on there that were buying some ads. That's, it didn't have an impact. And it is a shell. It's not even a shell of the former conspiracy narrative or collusion narrative of 2017. I mean, that is gone. Everything has fallen apart. Everything has collapsed. And the only thing that's somewhat standing is the DNC hack. And, there's a couple other points that I wanted to raise earlier. This isn't the only weird thing about the DNC hack. And obviously we referenced some of the issues and concerns that have been out there, but to see some of the same researchers tie the attribution, that's not the only thing that's weird. We actually, have some open questions for CrowdStrike and the provision of the system images, the server images, the computer images to the Department of Justice and the FBI in the first place, because CrowdStrike finished up and they pushed out this narrative on June 14th, 2016, that the Russians did it, right? That was CrowdStrike's attribution. The government had no access at that point. They hadn't seen anything. And if you look at some of these emails and some of the exhibits from the Sussman trial, including Exhibit 147, none of this data and none of this technical data made it to the FBI until at least October 2016. And that is a huge red flag. And I'm not even saying, there was something wrong. I'm just saying it's a red flag because days after the U.S. government had formally attributed the hack of the DNC to Russia on October 7th, there's a joint attribution statement released. Days after that, they were still trying to get the server images from CrowdStrike. They're still trying to get basic technical data provided by CrowdStrike. They're still trying to get unredacted CrowdStrike reports. And you're saying, wait a minute, unredacted? What do you mean? I'm saying CrowdStrike and the DNC provided the FBI with reports that had redactions in them. How insane is that? And you go back to the broader picture. Think about what had happened. They had opened Crossfire Hurricane. They had pulled they had attempted to pull a FISA warrant by that point on Carter Page. They were about to get it for the first time. They'd opened up investigations of Paul Manafort, of General Flynn, of Papadopoulos, and all these other individuals that had ties to the campaign. They were in full-fledged, they were beating up everything that they could get their hands on, and they hadn't even verified that the Russians had hacked the DNC. And that, we've been very, very careful and very, very reluctant about saying conspiracy, and we've really waited for evidence, but we're starting to get evidence, right? We're starting to get documents, and some of these documents that come out of our FOIAs and these trials, you can't explain, and they prompt questions that need to be asked and they need to be answered. And that's really the point of this video, is to get this into the public discussion a little bit, get some people asking some of the right questions. I don't know if at the end of the day, maybe the Russians did it. I don't know. But people need to ask questions. We can't go through everything we went through and have years of pounding the table on these narratives and that not have a reckoning for it. We need to know very specifically what was real and what wasn't. And let's put it all on the table finally and really get to the truth. That's what we want. MB, do you have anything else?
Yeah, well, just one detail. If you look at the big picture of this, without the DNC hack, you don't have the predicate for Crossfire Hurricane, because the tip that Papadopoulos dropped was construed as being Trump is going to get DNC hacked emails, which someone in the FBI that I think we might know the answer to now, and he may have some legal problems of his own, decided that it was the DNC hack he was talking about instead of the Hillary Clinton email hack that everyone was talking about, that everyone assumed Hillary's homebrew server was hacked. Somewhere along the line, whatever nonsense that Papadopoulos had said got tied to the DNC hack. So without the DNC hack being there probably was no predicate to open Crossfire Hurricane in the beginning, and all of this sort of sprang from that source. So it is a big deal. It is something that we need to look very carefully at and find out if what exactly was going on here. How did this start, and why did it start? I don't doubt that the Russians were trying to hack everything in sight, but did they actually do this, and why was the FBI not allowed to investigate this up front with the actual drives and get to the bottom of it for months? I mean, for months. It's insane that, on the one hand, they're saying this is a critical, counterintelligence issue for the United States of America. On the other hand, it's like, well, DNC, you know what? Give us the report that your private company gives you and we'll be good. It doesn't add up.
Well, that brings me to another red flag, and that is the timing that we saw and the coordinated efforts that we saw on behalf of Clinton operatives throughout Russiagate. And there's a ton of examples where you have multiple streams of information flowing to the FBI or flowing to the CIA or flowing to prominent senators or to the media. And in the concerted effort to create pressure on the FBI and create pressure on others to investigate certain items or to give some credibility to allegations that they were feeding into the agency, and to give the illusion of corroboration, to give the illusion that multiple streams independently were providing information that was similar or substantially similar, obviously to prompt a criminal investigation of Donald Trump. And ultimately, I think, with the goal of this blowing up into a big October 2016 surprise. And there's a couple reasons that it didn't. I mean, the Alphabet Bank allegations didn't really pan out. It was supposed to be a bombshell story by the New York Times, and it really didn't pan out. And there's a couple other things. But, circling back, whether this was a false flag operation at the DNC or not, it had the same impact. And that's, the impact was on June 14th, the Clinton campaign blasted out, absolutely hammered this narrative that Russia had hacked the DNC. I don't know why they did it to the extent they did, but you can go back. The articles are still up, and there's quotes from a bunch of DNC officials. They put it way out there that Russia did this. And then the very next day, Guccifer 2.0 had his first blog. And I find that oddly convenient, given some of the timing signals that we've seen through other pieces of the story. But then, so June 14th, the articles come out. June 15th, Guccifer 2.0 has his first blog. And then 5 days after that, Christopher Steele writes his first dossier and starts the process of getting in contact with the FBI to give that dossier to them, which obviously, this DNC hacking out there created this really friendly environment for Christopher Steele to get his dossiers to the FBI, because all of a sudden now there's a big problem, right? And Steele's going to the FBI and saying, "Hey, I know all about this. There's collusion. There's collusion." They're gonna listen to it, and that's very alarming to me that those things sort of tie together that cleanly. Because as I said, I mean, there's so many examples of this. There's been such coordination, clear coordination, and I wonder if this is another example of that. And if the DNC hack is a false flag operation, I mean, we're looking at the biggest political scandal in American history by far, with everything that came after it. And
Yeah,
maybe have
there's no question about that. If that's how it comes down, it's going to be something just monumental that the country's going to have to deal with. But if nothing else, we're learning more and more about how far back the Clinton campaign's decision to sort of weaponize their biggest weakness, that being first the email server issue, and second being the Uranium One scandal, that the Clintons set up sort of this facade to counterpunch, and I think we're learning a lot about that, the early days, even pre 2015, of how they figured out the best defense for their weakness in that area was to counterattack and basically paint everyone that was against the Clintons as Russia, basically. That started before even Trump necessarily came down the gold elevator. This was something that seemingly they worked out with some even alleged conservatives and Republicans. It's neocons, whatever you want to call them, but I think we're definitely finding out that was the game plan, to keep sort of their not rocking the boat in the geopolitical sense, and that sort of took off. And we don't know the details of this, but it's just amazing how that turned into, wow, all of a sudden we are accusing a presidential candidate of being a Russian operative, and it's insane. You can't even, if it was fiction, no one would believe it. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't made up whole cloth on the fly. It was something that developed kind of over time, and I think it was just the right tool at the right time for the Democrats.
Absolutely. Yep. I think we've been going close to an hour. Really appreciate you starting at 2 a.m. It's very kind of you, NB. Obviously, we're closing in on 3 a.m. now. So we'll wrap this one up here. I think it's our goal. I think you would agree with me, NB. We're going to try to establish these channels. So on Rumble, on YouTube, and the intention is not only to cover some of these older topics and circle back and try to get some of this information out there, but we're also setting the stage for future live discussions, which, obviously we have the John Durham report coming. We plan to probably stream that here and then have probably some coverage in the breaks or whatever the case might be. The Russiagate binder of documents is actually on the cusp of being released. That's been the subject of a judicial watch lawsuit, and that's supposed to have been out actually over the last couple of weeks. And I think when push comes to shove, that's probably on the cusp of being released as well. I've actually got a bunch of FOIAs out there still. I have a couple lawsuits myself, and I'll be getting some documents over the next few weeks as well. And then who knows what might else come. So what else may come. And certainly when those discussions happen, we'll try to do more of these chats, and we'll bring in other members of our corner as well who aren't necessarily available at 2 a.m. So, we'll try to get Full Nelson and Walk of Fire and some of these other guys. And, I'm really thankful to be working with MB and some of these other individuals. I mean, if you're unfamiliar with this, I hope you'll stick around and see what else we have to offer. We've been at this a long, long time. So we have a lot of information, not necessarily going to present it with a bunch of, flair and drama and, nothing else. We're not TV people. We're, 9 to 5 guys, and we do this, at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. on the weekends for the most part. But we'll do the best we can to connect viewers to the information that we have, and we have a lot of information. So, MB, great one. Really appreciate you coming on, and we'll end this one here.
Sounds good. It was great talking to you. Get some sleep. Let's pick it back up in the morning. We're gonna get back to work, right?
Absolutely. Have a good one.
All right, take care.